Hello, my name is Tara Kachaturoff, and I'm the host of Michigan Entrepreneur, where we feature businesses from startup to stellar. Today we have as our special guest Mark Cordes, who is the founder and president of Wild West Academy. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tara.
Well, I'm really excited to have you on our program today because you have a really unique business, and my quest these past 5 going on 6 years is to find interesting, amazing businesses to feature on the program. And I happen to find yours, Wild West Academy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll delve into a little more detail.
Okay, my name is Mark Cordes. I'm president of Wild West Academy and owner. I founded the company 20 years ago, and it is a personal protection training company, all aspects. The majority of training has to do with firearms, but I also offer physical management training and training in tactics and strategy and mindset and the different things that are involved in personal protection issues.
And there's so much here I want to cover because it's all interesting to me. What led you to starting this company, this training company, Wild West Academy?
Actually, there were 2 things that started me into it. The first was personal experience with violent crime. I used to be somebody on the far left who didn't believe that personal protection was something you needed to be concerned about. As long as you avoided bad places and didn't hang around with unsavory people, you would be okay. And after describing that to a friend of mine who was inviting me to a karate school, that I didn't need it, I then very shortly thereafter suffered a violent attack from a gang in an area that probably wasn't the best, but certainly didn't think it would be dangerous. And after surgery and recovery and not being able to work for a few months, I dedicated myself then to the physical aspects of personal protection in martial arts. And after about 20 years of training in several different styles, I started teaching that, and I teach that to this day.
Well, in your own business, Wild West Academy, let's talk about some of the things that you do in terms of training. So can you go again through some of the things that you do, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about them. So you're doing firearms training and
physical management training as well.
Physical management training. What is physical management training?
Physical management, it basically means you are controlling the physical aggression of somebody else in the best way possible to prevent yourself from being injured and to limit or minimize the amount of injury that they will receive. There are different levels of physical management that are appropriate for different situations. Somebody who gets a little too drunk at Aunt Shirley and Uncle Chuck's 50th wedding anniversary, who's a family member, probably you don't want to harm too much. Yeah, whereas out on the street, a stranger who looks like they definitely have the ability to do you tremendous physical damage, then we sort of amp up the techniques that we would use for that.
And these are non-firearm related techniques.
Right. Mm-hmm. Many people, physical management is very acceptable, very acceptable. Mm-hmm. Anybody will take a self-defense class. But when you start talking about firearms, many people don't want anything to do with that. They'll say physical management's okay, but I don't like guns.
Now you're teaching also martial arts.
Yes.
Correct. And what genre?
Well, the interesting thing about that is I've taken them all. Just about anything I think you could mention. Mm-hmm. After about 17 years of training, I took from a person who was actually Japanese, but taught me Aikido, Judo, and Karate, and a little boxing, and a little wrestling all together, and showed me how to incorporate the best from each. So although it's Japanese in orientation, that's the style that I teach, because what I found out from him actually is that being able to kick and punch hard and knowing some moves, if you come up against somebody who knows a variety of disciplines and you don't know them, you can be in serious trouble no matter how well you believe you perform in the discipline you've chosen.
And then, of course, along with that physical management, you call it, you do firearms training. First of all, who do you train a variety of people. Can you tell us the types of people or organizations that you work with to train? And then we'll dive in a little bit more about what types of things you do in the training.
Yes, I train armored car company personnel. I've trained management of armored car companies to train their own people, and security agencies, private detectives, court officers, law enforcement. But civilians is the largest part of my training.
Have you ever trained, do you have many executives and?
Oh, yes, yes.
A lot of executives.
Yeah, yes, as a matter of
because
fact.
they're targets, I mean,
generally
unfortunately.
speaking, yeah. When I get somebody who is, I had, there's a major hotel in Troy that had a very tragic incident some years ago where a group of people came in and actually executed the woman at the desk. And the manager of that hotel discovered her and came immediately to me the next day for an emergency permit and emergency training. He reminded me a lot of myself because he had never seen anyone shot before in such a brutal manner, and it was a significant emotional experience for him, such that he turned all of his thinking around. And Massey, in the 70s, had a film called I Am Now What I Used to Be When, and it talks about how our belief systems are born out of who we are and what we've experienced, and those we hang on to intensely until or unless some significant emotional experience occurs that shocks our conscience to the degree that it changes our thinking. And that's what happened to me as well. I don't know that I mentioned it in my bio, but I was an EMT in Detroit for 15 years and treated gunshot wounds and stabbings, etc., every day. And the first gunshot wound that I treated was a cashier at a small party store who was shot in the head after the robber had the money and was halfway out the door. And he turned around, came back in, and shot her in the head. And having spent quite a bit of time with her and what was left of her, that shocked my conscience to the degree that I had to absorb the inhumanity that might actually be out there where somebody would do something so violent for no reason at all, which I didn't really understand before.
And it's even worse because they turned around and came back. I mean,
Right.
that gets to a different point.
So money was not the motive, and that's another misconception people have. I'm not going to carry a gun, have a gun, because if they want my money, I'll just give them my wallet. Oftentimes they want more than your wallet. So my question is, how much do you want to give, or how much are you willing to give?
And it's interesting because everybody that comes on the show, they have different reasons for starting their business, and this one is a very personal experience. This is an emotional, physical, mental, spiritual experience that led you to creating this business. It's all points, pulling on all points.
Yeah.
What are some of the types of things that you train people on in terms of guns and gun safety and things like that? Because again, a lot of the people that you're working with have maybe never touched a gun. They may be scared of it. They're trying to work through their mental preconceptions about guns and who carries one and who doesn't. And I think they'd be surprised if they really knew how many people carry guns and of their friends and their family who actually have concealed weapons permits. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the types of training you offer, because you train people to get concealed weapons permit.
Yes.
Like they have to go through training for that,
Yes.
correct? I don't know because I don't have one.
Yes. Well, the training for a concealed pistol license in Michigan involves 3 hours of range time, actually live firing on a range, and instruction in safe handling, gun safety rules, target shooting. But in my particular course, I emphasize defensive shooting skills. And target shooting bears very little resemblance to defensive shooting because you're not going to be bringing the gun up to sight level, and you're not going to have time to concentrate. It's going to be more impulsive, and it has to be extremely fast.
When your adrenaline's running and your vision is narrowed to a pinpoint, and you don't hear anything, and everything's in slow-mo, and everything's moving like at one,
Time dilation, they call that, and auditory exclusion, you don't hear, and fine motor skills diminish, and you may have a poor recollection of what's happened afterwards and what's happening during the event as well. So things need to be very automatic. I've had people actually take the class and do very well on range, even defensive shooting and whatnot, and score at 100% on the test after the 5-hour class. And then I always offer people the opportunity to undergo a simulated attack scenarios at my school. I have 1,200 square feet, and the back area is all for physical management. And it really brings the point home when I put a holster and a dummy gun on somebody who has just performed really, really well in the class and seems to have all the skills. and I will just put on a little bit of pressure, just a little bit, like you might experience on the street. And generally the response is they completely freeze. They don't do anything at all, even though they have the skill. So that's another aspect of training, is performing through stress and actually accepting the attack for what it is, whether it's a surprise attack or what I call the friendly attack, where somebody appears to be very friendly and then all of a sudden turns hostile instantaneously, or an attack that's obvious. There's different ways that you need to move and think and perform for all three of those.
Yeah, because that's not, that's experiential. I mean, you don't really get times to practice violent attacks against you, and that it is different than learning on the range. Like, I'm a really good shot on a range, or at least I used to be, but I don't know how I'd be if somebody was attacking me. You know, I don't know.
It's hard because as a morally upstanding person, as CPL holders generally are, you've got an inner mental resistance to actively harm somebody else, regardless of the circumstance.
It's against what we're
Exactly. And then, the idea of you might actually kill them, that's pretty hard for the average person, and that's probably the biggest stumbling block in self-defense, is that you have to amp up to the status of the attack very, very quickly. The attacker knows what they're going to do. You don't know what they're going to do. You have to assess it, think about it legally, think about it physically, think about it in regard to your firearms usage, all in a split second. Your only two options really when faced with violence are persuasion and force. And if persuasion breaks down, then you have to deal with the force being levied against you. If the force being levied against you is physical, then physical management is very good. If it happens to involve a firearm, then physical management is not so good. I had a mother last week who brought her son for some training in how to fight. He's a hockey player and a football player, but he did not know how to fight, and somebody at school said they were going to beat him up. So she came and she took a couple of hours of Aikido and karate and boxing and wrestling from me and judo, and on her way to leave, she said, I would really like for us to learn how to utilize firearms, and at least to know, because for God's sakes, if somebody invaded our home, I would want my son at least to know how to use a gun. Of course, I would never have a gun in my home.
Right, but you never know what happens if the other person has one and it gets loose. At least you would have some sense of it.
That's really my carrot in the whole thing, too, to see the transition with him from when he came in to 2 hours later.
About the confidence level is amazing.
And with the firearms, same thing. I personally don't like firearms at all, and I don't have 1,000 of them. And it's because I don't like them that I feel
you
I
have
need
the training.
I need
you can
to know.
educate. Let's talk a little bit about women in firearms, because you have some classes that are just women only. Because I know women sometimes don't like to be in classes with men, because they just don't want that pressure on them, perhaps, and just want to be able to do it on their own. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences with training women and kind of the feedback you've gotten from women who have gone through handgun training? Because many of them are there because they've experienced physical violence and other types of things. It's not that they just walk in the door and say, hey, I want to learn about guns. No. Something is usually a precipitator.
Right. Women make excellent students because they're generally motivated to learn, and they generally come with no knowledge at all. So they progress very rapidly from 0 to 150. Most men have some experience with firearms, whether it be good experience or bad regarding their knowledge. But women make excellent students because they don't have the knowledge, and they listen, and they really want to learn. And I think the reason they don't want to be in the same class with men sometimes is they don't want to feel inferior, and they don't want to be shown up, so to speak. And men seem to have a tendency to do that from time to time. So, but for women who call for my class, who request, women-only classes, I tell them that the things that you're afraid of in terms of taking a class with a man are not evident in my classes, because I don't teach that way and I don't allow that. But it's a comfortable environment, it's nurturing, it's supportive, it's compliment, suggestion, compliment, compliment. And I use that technique in life in general, not just in my classes, but if you want good results from people that you need to interact with, that's a very good formula. I also have another formula I teach in class called EPA, Emotion, Pride, and Anger. And I tell people at the beginning of class, those three things have to be completely off your table for the rest of your life if you're planning on utilizing, carrying, having a gun at all. Because those are the things that get people in trouble with guns. Everyone knows when they instinctively, when their life is in danger, but sometimes getting to that level, you can actually have some contribution and facilitation to if you're not careful about the way you react to things. And the people that I know personally, I only know a few, who've gotten in trouble with guns. They allowed their emotions to get involved. They allowed their pride to be involved. They got angry, and then they did something they wish they hadn't. Not even utilizing the firearm, but just doing something that influenced the rest of their lives due to their criminal record now.
Can you explain a little bit, like the general experience, like when somebody goes through your training at Wild West Academy? What's the experience like? What do you do? I mean, you have some teaching, you have some range time. Can you explain all that?
Yes, I tell people when they're coming to class that it's not really a class, it's a life-changing event. I tell them you won't be the same person that you were by the end of the day, and it'll all be in a positive way. A lot of it philosophical and Buddhist, if you will, but you'll be a calmer, more peaceful, hopefully, person who will have the knowledge to defend themselves very well. But the 3 hours of range is about utilizing the firearm in self-defense situations. There is no standing still. We take one shot standing still. Everything else is moving and shooting.
Oh, that's
because when you're being attacked, you're not going to stand still.
Right.
So if you practice shooting standing still, that's the only kind of shooting you'll know. Even a physical attack, you need to move out of the line of attack very quickly as your first move. The classroom portion is more of a psychology class. Yes, it's tactics, strategy, mindset, all of the adrenaline rush phenomenon you have to deal with, and law, a huge amount of law. But in reality, it's a psychology class. Because
do you have like a workbook for people or some handouts to help them along with this so they can remember? Because you take a class, you never can remember anything afterwards.
Yeah, right. We do have a book. I'm not big into visual aids other than real life scenario. I show some videos that leave people speechless when they're over. They're very short. They end fatally. And they demonstrate the breakdown of people's thresholds in terms of what they will allow somebody else to do, and how when that gets out of hand it can end up being deadly, even though it may start off as not deadly. That's to demonstrate that aspect. As far as other visual aids, I don't really like to give people handouts. I don't use PowerPoint, and I don't like them to open their book until I'm going to make a specific reference, because they can read later, and I have so much important information to give them that I really want them to listen.
Is this like all happen in one day? Is this like a one-day training?
It is, but of course I offer free lifetime retakes. So
which is amazing.
Yeah, and I do have people that come back, because there's just no way. There's at least 30 techniques of defensive shooting that are presented in the range, and if a person remembers 2 of them the next day, they're probably doing well. So I strongly encourage them to come back. I want them to come back. I had 2 women that came for a 5-year renewal refresher to renew their licenses last week. And one of them hadn't bought a gun yet and had not applied for a permit, but she wanted to take the class just in case she decides to. And it was amazing to me how much, it was almost like 2 brand new students. They remembered almost nothing from 5 years ago. And that's why I say the importance of continued training.
Excellent. Very well said. Thank you, Mark Cordes, owner and president of Wild West Academy in Royal Oak.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.